Well, health-conscious consumers in Connecticut are one step closer to knowing exactly what's in their food. The state legislature passed a bill requiring special labeling on foods that contain genetically modified ingredients. This bill was overwhelmingly passed 134-3 and is now on the governor's desk awaiting his signature. But the mandate will not take effect until 4 of Connecticut's surrounding states enact similar legislations. So what exactly did this bill achieve? Joining me with some of the answers is Liz Reitzig. She's the co-founder of the Farm Food Free Coalition. Liz, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi.
So as I had just kind of alluded to, the Connecticut legislature passed this act, but it doesn't go into effect without the help of other states. So was it mostly symbolic?
Well, it was definitely more than symbolic, because what it did is it motivated and mobilized people to be in action on the issue. And whether that means that they're going to start producing their own food or they're going to start making a bigger fuss about it at the grocery stores they shop at, it really did help to mobilize people around the issue. And it brought huge awareness to the fact that there's GMOs prevalent in our food supply and they are not labeled.
Sure. Now, what's the next step for this type of GMO labeling? I mean, obviously, there are 4 other states have to sign on, but is this an idea that's kind of spreading?
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, I keep hearing that we're almost at the tipping point for it. So the generation of awareness that we're getting from the initiation of these bills, whether or not they pass, is a huge step in that process. And it's really exciting to see it happen, to see the GMO conversation happening and people getting into it and they're interested in finding ways that they can source food that they know doesn't have GMOs, whether or not it's labeled, whether that means their own food production or sourcing from a local farm.
Now, at the same time that we have this Connecticut legislature debating and coming up with a bipartisan agreement on GMO labeling that was overwhelmingly passed, we had last November Proposition 37 in California, where the people were the ones that struck it down. So is the best way to go about getting this GMO labeling to go through the legislature instead of the people, and is it really the will of the people?
Well, I think that we definitely need to have both approaches. I mean, it's super important because especially at this time, you know, there are still people who say, what is a GMO? And so we've got to answer that for everyone so everybody knows what it is. And then, you know, either way, whether it's through a voter initiative or whether it's through the legislature, there will be the tipping point of demand, and grocers, retailers, and food processors will all be getting on board because the demand will be there.
And let's talk about the difference between a federal approach to GMOs and a state-level approach. Is there one that's better, in your opinion?
Well, just in my opinion, I think the state-level approach is better because the more localized you can get, the better.
Sure. Now let's move on to the other end of the spectrum, away from genetically modifying foods. A Wisconsin farmer named Vernon Hirschberger is potentially facing jail time for his role in producing and selling raw milk, as I understand it. Can you tell me a little bit more about this case and why producing and selling raw milk amounts to criminal charges?
Right. Well, basically, Vernon Hirschberger is a peaceful farmer. He operates a dairy in Wisconsin, and he was charged with 4 criminal counts for distribution of fresh milk. So this is unprocessed, unhomogenized milk that he was distributing to his local community. These are people that bought into the farm that he was operating. Many of them helped operate the farm, and the state brought 4 criminal charges against him.
And I understand it, he's not the first person to face charges like this. There was 3 other acquitted, is that right?
Well, there was one other in Minnesota, another farmer in Minnesota, who was charged with criminal counts for distribution, and he was acquitted, yes.
And I understand that Vernon's charges, many of his charges have actually been acquitted as well. Why is that?
Well, so the 4 counts he was facing were distribution of raw milk, operating a dairy without a permit, and operating a retail food establishment without a permit, and then violating a holding order. And the violating a holding order, that's the one he was found guilty on. The others he was acquitted on. And that's also the least significant because the others set a precedent for other farmers who are wanting to engage in that same level of private contractual food transactions with their local communities.
And let's talk about the idea of raw milk, because that does bring into the question the idea of food safety. As I understand it, raw milk doesn't, it could potentially have poisonous pathogens in it, which is why the Food and Drug Administration and others really want it to be regulated. So first of all, what benefits do you know of that are for raw milk versus processed milk?
Yeah, well, that's a whole other conversation, but I'll touch on that. Raw milk has multiple health benefits. Many people who switch from conventional milk to fresh, unprocessed processed whole milk, they just experience many, many health benefits, from weight loss to lower allergies, less asthma, improved immunity. You know, this is what real people experience when they make the switch. The whole argument of safety, I mean, to me, that's really a non-issue, because there's multiple foods that contain pathogens or that can contain pathogens, and dairy in general is at the very bottom of that list. And so to have that be the argument against raw milk is irrelevant. I mean, it's not a component, really, of the bigger picture that we're looking at.
So what do you make of this, just the two stories that we've been talking about? What do you make of this idea of the FDA and other food enforcement administrations going after a person that is selling raw milk, but really pushing for and not criminalizing bioengineered foods? What does that say to you as a consumer and as an advocate for food?
Well, it says that there's a big difference between industry and the private sector, and that they've got a one-size-fits-all kind of regulation, and it really doesn't. And we need to look at these regulations and look at the enforcement of these regulations and ask, you know, as a culture here, is it appropriate to not do anything to the big corporations who really are causing massive numbers of illnesses or potentially damaging the environment through GMOs, and then go after small Amish family farms with armed SWAT teams? Is that really an appropriate use of how to enforce these regulations?
So what is next for the case of Vernon?
Well, the next thing is his sentencing hearing, which is on June 13th, I believe. And at that point, the judge will determine if he, or how much jail time he gets for the one guilty charge he had.
Should we expect to see similar cases like this of a small Amish farmer, as you describe, Amish farmer, as you describe him?
I think we'll see a little bit more of this. You know, the enforcement is still so aggressive against these small farms, unfortunately. And so I think that before it gets better, it has the likelihood to get worse.
Liz Reitzig, co-founder with the Farm Food Freedom Coalition, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.